Imagine a time when the world was on the brink of collapse, where empires collided and freedom became a dangerous word. In 1792, the French Revolution shook the earth, and the flames of chaos began to spread across Europe. In the midst of this turmoil, two nations were in direct confrontation. The powerful revolutionary France, thirsty to expand its ideas of freedom and equality, and the unbeatable Great Britain, ruler of the seas. But among the winds of war and the echoes of battle, a figure emerged that would defy all limits of the impossible. His name? Horatio Nelson. With unwavering courage, brilliant strategies, and a life marked by losses, victories, and sacrifices, Nelson would become one of the greatest military heroes of all time, personifying the British resistance against revolutionary France. His story is one of courage, sacrifice, and above all, of a destiny that he could not control, but knew how to conquer. Now, you are about to embark on Horatio Nelson's epic journey. Get ready, because this story begins in the heat of war, where rough seas and intense battles await you. It was the year 1758 in a small town called Burnham Thorpe in the heart of England. Although it seemed like a quiet and peaceful place, the destiny of one of the most important figures in world history was about to unfold there. In that year, a boy was born who would become a legend, an immortal commander whose deeds would forever mark the course of history. This boy's name was Horatio Nelson, and he wasn't just another kid in a small village. He was the son of Admiral Nelson, a captain in the Royal Navy, a respected man who considered the sea his second home. From an early age, Horatio would have a deep connection to the sea, a connection that would undoubtedly influence him throughout his life. As the son of a sailor, Horatio grew up hearing stories about the sea and the great naval battles fought in distant waters. His father, with his pride and dedication to the Navy, instilled in young Horatio a love of sailing and life at sea. But at the same time, this connection to the Navy also meant that little Nelson would grow up in an environment where a sense of duty and courage would be shaped. From the earliest years of his life, Horatio showed signs that he would be someone special. His curiosity seemed endless, and while other children were interested in the typical games of their age, Nelson showed a growing interest in stories of adventures and battles, something that undoubtedly fueled his imagination. And it is here that Nelson's story begins to take shape, at the beginning of his journey to become one of the greatest naval commanders in history. At the age of 12, Nelson was sent to London, where he would begin receiving a formal education that would pave the way for his entry into the Royal Navy. Although the decision to send such a young man to the big city was a major change in his life, Nelson was eager to follow in the footsteps of his father and so many other sailors he admired. In 1771, at the age of just 13, he was given his first chance to embark as an officer in the Royal Navy, aboard the ship HMS Reasonable. At this time, the promising young man was beginning to take his first steps towards what would be a career full of extraordinary achievements. While other young men might have been distracted by the pleasures of youth, Nelson was determined to make his mark on the world. This moment, the beginning of Horatio Nelson's journey, was marked by one fundamental characteristic: determination. From an early age, the boy born in a small English village seemed destined to excel. And it was this determination, this inner fire that guided him, that would make him not just a ship's captain, but a man whose deeds would reverberate for generations. The year was 1775, and tensions between the great European powers were simmering, with conflicts spreading across the seas and distant lands. It was the beginning of the Seven Games of War, a global conflict in which England sought to maintain its naval supremacy against the French and Spanish. This turbulent scenario was the perfect stage for shaping the future of a young aspiring commander. Nelson, just 17 years old, set sail for the Caribbean, a region as stunning as it was dangerous. At the time, The Caribbean was known as much for its crystal-clear waters as it was for being a ruthless naval battleground. Ships crossed the ocean carrying valuable goods, but they were also always ready for combat. The heat was stifling, the winds could be treacherous, and diseases like yellow fever could ravage entire crews. It was an environment that did not forgive weakness, but Nelson showed no hesitation. Under the command of experienced captains, the young officer soon realized that war at sea was much more than exchanging cannon fire. He learned the importance of strategy, teamwork, and courage in the face of danger. The waters of the Caribbean were a veritable chessboard, where every move had to be calculated with precision. Nelson observed everything closely, absorbing every detail. One of his first great lessons came when his ship was attacked by a French fleet. The battle was intense and chaotic. Cannonballs tore through the air. Shrapnel flew across the decks, and black smoke covered the horizon. Nelson, though inexperienced, did not back down. He helped wherever needed, encouraging the crew and exuding a confidence that seemed unshakable for one so young. But naval battles were not just about brute force. There was also the constant challenge of maintaining crew morale. During the lulls between battles, Nelson displayed a human side that began to earn the respect of his fellow sailors. He listened to stories, laughed with the sailors, and shared meals, creating bonds that would prove crucial in the most difficult moments. As the conflict progressed, Nelson began to rise to prominence among senior officers. He was bold but never reckless. In one particularly challenging mission, Nelson was tasked with leading a small group to recapture a strategic outpost on a French-occupied island. Even with fewer numbers, he used the knowledge he acquired about sea currents and local geography to surprise the enemy. The victory was not only a military triumph, but also a milestone in Nelson's young career, who already demonstrated that he possessed the instincts of a great leader. The War of the Seven Particles was a formative and learning period for Nelson. Although he was not yet the legendary commander the world would come to know, the young officer began to forge his reputation. He faced storms, brutal fighting, and the harsh conditions of the Caribbean, but emerged stronger, wiser, and even more determined to make his mark on the world. Nelson had found his calling. The sea was not only his battlefield, it was where he belonged. This first great mission not only tested his courage and skill, but also lit in his heart the flame that would guide him through the years of glory that were to follow. Horatio Nelson's journey through the turbulent waters of the Caribbean was just beginning, and with it, the challenges that would forge his legend. It was in the West Indies, a strategic region full of disputes between colonial powers, that Nelson faced what would be one of the most defining moments of his career and his life. In 1782, Nelson was aboard HMS Albemarle, one of the many British vessels that patrolled the waters of the Caribbean, protecting England's interests against enemy forces, especially the French and Spanish. The wind was strong. The waves beat mercilessly against the hull of the ship. The coming battle was not just another skirmish. It would be one of the bloodiest and most intense ever fought in that theater of war. During a skirmish near the island of St. Lucia, the tension in the air was palpable. The Albemarle was preparing for a fierce attack on the French fleet, which threatened to expand its influence over the region. The sails of the two main ships rose like shadows against the horizon, and the sound of the waves was drowned out by the shouts of the crew and the roar of the gunboats. Nelson, as always, was in the thick of the action, adrenaline pumped through his veins. He was not just a commander in theory. He was the first to rush to the front line, leading his men with an example of unwavering courage. In the midst of the battle, when the crack of explosions seemed deafening, a cannonball fired by the enemy fleet sliced through the air with deadly speed. The impact was accurate, hitting the right side of his face. The bullet struck his right eye, destroying the vision of one of a sailor's most precious senses. But rather than succumb to the pain, Nelson shouted a command to his officers, ordering them to hold the line of battle. His body was wounded, but his mind was sharp, as precise as the orders he shouted to his crews. Even with the sight in one eye gone, He remained steadfast in command, as if the sea and fate demanded that he rise above the pain. The blood streaming down Nelson's face did not make him flinch. Instead, he showed everyone that his courage was unbeatable. With the same fervor, he continued to give orders, moving through the ship and guiding his men to victory. His officers, who witnessed their commander's determination, soon realized that they were in the presence of a man of unbreakable courage, someone who, even when wounded, would never lose focus on his duty. The battle was a triumph for the British, but the price was high. Nelson was taken back to the ship, where doctors tried to save his injured eye, but there was nothing they could do. The vision in Horatio Nelson's right eye is gone forever. The loss, however, did not shake his soul. On the contrary, it became a symbol of their resilience. On his face, what appeared to be a scar of tragedy would soon become a mark of honor. Proof that Nelson did not fear suffering, but rather overcame it. His courage in that battle in the West Indies did not go unnoticed. The sailors of his fleet began to see him as more than just a commander. He was an almost mythical figure, someone willing to give everything for his nation and his men. Nelson's sacrifice that day earned them a deep respect for him, not just as a leader, but as a living symbol of bravery. He had lost a part of himself, but he had gained the eternal respect of his crew and the admiration of all who knew of the struggle. After the incident, rather than retreat and recover from his injuries, Nelson returned to the battlefield. The loss of an eye not only did not weaken him, but actually strengthened him, and he continued to be an active commander, shining in every encounter with his courage and leadership skills. Little by little, Nelson built a reputation that would lead him to become one of the greatest heroes in the history of the British Royal Navy. The loss of an eye was not just a moment of pain for Nelson. It was the first of many signs of his unbreakable courage. He would later prove capable of facing even greater challenges, overcoming even deeper losses, and, with his bravery and indomitable spirit, changing the course of history forever. The year 1792 marked the beginning of one of the most turbulent and decisive periods in European history, the French Revolution. In Paris, the winds of change were blowing hard, and the country was about to be consumed by a series of events that would transform not only France, but the entire European continent. The old regime, with its kings and aristocrats, was being overthrown, and in their place a new revolutionary ideology was emerging that preached liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideas, although attractive to many, were viewed with great suspicion by monarchs and governments throughout Europe, who feared the contagious effect of the revolution. For Britain, the rise of the French Revolution posed a direct threat. The last thing the British Empire wanted was to see republican and revolutionary ideas spread to the rest of Europe, especially when it was at war with France. The fear was that the winds of revolution might reach the British Isles and ignite a similar movement, destabilizing the British monarchy. To the British, republican ideals of equality and liberty seemed a threat to their power, their traditions, and, above all, their system of government. In this climate of tension and distrust, France and Britain positioned themselves as implacable enemies. The conflict between the two powers was not just a question of land or wealth. It was a struggle for ideological and political supremacy. Britain, with its monarchy and empire, feared the impact of revolutionary ideas, which could inspire the people and undermine the foundations of royal power. France, for its part, was committed to expanding its new ideology and spreading revolutionary ideals throughout Europe, with the intention of challenging the established order. In the midst of this fierce rivalry, Horatio Nelson, the British commander, was preparing to be drawn into one of the most intense battles of his career. Nelson was already known for his daring, courage, and ability to lead his troops in moments of great crisis. When Britain decided to go to war with France to contain the spread of the French Revolution, Nelson did not hesitate to align himself with the cause. For him, the fight was not just a matter of protecting Britain's seas. It was a matter of defending the traditional order and combating the threat of a system he saw as dangerous and unstable. With the French government in flux and the new revolutionary regime taking shape, Britain knew it would need to act quickly and effectively. France was expanding its power across the continent, and its ambitions in the Mediterranean in particular were becoming increasingly aggressive. The Royal Navy under Nelson was preparing to confront the French naval force, and Nelson, as ever, was ready to be the sword that would cut through the ambitions of the revolution. The climate that was forming between the two nations was therefore a powder keg ready to explode. France, with its revolutionary fervor, saw itself as entitled to impose its ideas beyond its borders, while Great Britain, with its vast and powerful empire, positioned itself as a defender of status, fearing that the fire of revolution would be spread throughout Europe. And it was in this scenario of increasing tension that Nelson saw the battlefield emerge, ready to test his skill, courage, and loyalty to his homeland. The young commander knew that the war would be long and difficult, but he also knew that this fight against France was not just a military battle, but a fight for the survival of the British Empire and the established order in Europe. Nelson was preparing not only to defend his nation, but to confront one of the greatest threats to the stability of the modern world. The French Revolution, with its revolutionary energy, represented a paradigm shift that could transform all of Europe, and with it, the seas that Nelson was already beginning to master. The tension of war could already be felt on British shores, and while the fate of Europe seemed to hang in the balance, Nelson knew that he was about to be launched into a new phase of his career, where the greatness of his command skills and the strength of their courage would be tested like never before. The stage was set, the enemy was formidable, and the battle for the future of Europe was about to begin. And Nelson, as always, was ready to embrace his role at the center of this epic story. In 1798, the global scene was in turmoil. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French general, was determined to expand France's power and influence throughout Europe. Having conquered much of the European continent, Napoleon looked eastward, where the Ottoman Empire and Egypt offered vast opportunities for expansion. His plan was audacious. A military expedition to Egypt would not only secure control over the region, but would also open up a new strategic avenue for France's ambitions of conquest. He also intended to cut off the vital trade route to Britain through the Mediterranean. But Napoleon had not counted on Horatio Nelson. For the British, the threat of a French-dominated Egypt was not only a strategic issue, but also a direct threat to the empire. To prevent French ambitions from flourishing, the British Royal Navy prepared to face the French at sea. And it was Nelson, with his strategic mind and unwavering courage, who would lead this decisive battle. Tensions in the Mediterranean were at their height when, in August 1798, Nelson received orders to intercept the French fleet approaching Egypt. Napoleon, with his usual confidence, believed that his fleet was ready to conquer the East. But he underestimated Horatio Nelson's determination and cunning. The British commander was not only known for his courage, he also had a keen instinct for bold and unpredictable strategies, something that in those days was a real asset on the battlefield. On August 1st, 1798, Nelson encountered a French fleet anchored near Buker Bay in northern Egypt, a strategic but also vulnerable location. The British commander knew that this would be his opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the French and disrupt Napoleon's plans. But what happened next would be a shining example of leadership, daring, and naval audacity. Nelson, in a bold move, decided to attack the French fleet unexpectedly, deploying his ships in a formation that did not follow the traditional patterns of the time. He dared to attack the French in a way that no one else would have dared, defying the standards of conventional naval warfare. The two fleets faced off in the scorching heat of the Egyptian summer, as the winds and waves whipped the sea. The battle was fierce and relentless, with the ship's cannons firing incessantly. The sound of gunfire, the roar of explosions, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the salt of the sea made the Battle of the Nile a true test of endurance and courage. Throughout the encounter, Nelson demonstrated his ability to command under pressure, always at the forefront of his men, guiding them with a combination of tactical skill and inspiration. Over the course of hours of fighting, the tactical superiority of the British became evident. The French, poorly positioned and unable to react effectively to the unpredictability of British attacks, began to be overwhelmed. The French fleet, largely composed of heavy and difficult-to-maneuver ships, lacked the flexibility needed to deal with the constant pressure from the British. By the end of the day, the French were defeated, and Napoleon's fleet was all but destroyed. Nelson's victory at the Battle of the Nile was one of the most decisive in naval history. Not only did it halt Napoleon's plans to expand his influence in the East, but it also deprived France of a crucial strategic point, leaving the French fleet isolated in Egypt. The defeat was a devastating blow to Napoleon, who saw his ambitions of conquering the East and weakening Britain crumble in the face of Nelson's strength. Although Nelson had won a stunning victory, he was not immune to the cost of battle. His ship, the Vanguard, was badly damaged, and he himself was wounded, having to be rescued by his men. But Nelson, with characteristic determination, never let this stop him. Even though he was wounded, he continued to command, his presence ever steadfast and inspiring to his crew. He knew that, despite the odds, this victory was the key to weakening the enemy and securing Britain's naval supremacy. The Battle of the Nile was not only a military victory, but also a symbol of the courage and skill of a commander who defied the odds and struck a decisive blow against one of the most powerful figures of the age. Nelson not only defeated the French fleet, but also dashed Napoleon's hopes of expanding his influence in the East and undermined France's confidence in its ability to dominate the seas. When news of Nelson's victory reached Britain, it was greeted with wild celebration. The British commander had become a national hero, and his fame spread throughout the empire. Yet for Nelson, victory at the Battle of the Nile was just another step in his ongoing struggle to protect his nation and the world order that he believed was vital to peace and stability. But by that moment, he had written his name in history indisputably. The decisive blow against the French in Egypt was not just a victory for Nelson, but a victory for Britain and, in a sense, for the balance of power in the world. (1801). The winds of war continued to blow strongly across Europe. Britain, having triumphed over the French fleet in Egypt, now faced a new threat: the powerful Danish fleet which, alongside France, was uniting to challenge British supremacy at sea. Tensions in northern Europe were at their height, and the Battle of Copenhagen would prove a defining moment not only for Britain, but also for Horatio Nelson himself. The commander, now one of the most respected officers in the Royal Navy, had demonstrated his prowess in countless battles. But he was yet to face a challenge that would test his mettle in unimaginable ways. The Danish fleet was anchored in Copenhagen, and Nelson was chosen to lead the offensive. The mission was clear: to crush the Danish threat and prevent the alliance between Denmark and France from strengthening. The enemy, however, was well prepared, and the battle promised to be fierce and bloody. On April 2nd, 1801, the battle began. The British forces, commanded by Nelson, advanced on the city of Copenhagen with overwhelming intensity. But it would not be an easy battle. The enemy, well positioned and with its unbeatable artillery, was ready to defend its city with all its might. The explosions of cannons and the sound of bullets ricocheting through the air became a constant as the two fleets faced each other in a desperate struggle for naval supremacy. During the battle, Nelson, as always, was on the front lines, leading his men with courage and determination. His tactical skill was remarkable, but the battle would be much tougher than he had anticipated. As the fighting intensified, Nelson was seriously wounded. A bullet fired from one of the enemy cannons hit his right arm, tearing it apart and leaving him in excruciating pain. The impact was devastating, but as always, Nelson did not let himself be discouraged. His determination was stronger than any physical pain. He knew that he could not abandon his men, and that his leadership was crucial to the success of the mission. The wound was severe, and Nelson's arm would have to be amputated. But the commander, showing no signs of weakness, maintained his calm and leadership. When the doctor came to treat the wound, Nelson asked to be taken to the fleet commander to ensure that the battle continued. Without his absence, causing any kind of disorganization. He refused to be removed from the fight. The pain was intense, but his loyalty to duty and country was even stronger. He would not give in to the pain, nor would he allow his wound to prevent British victory. After his arm was amputated, Nelson returned to the battlefield, now with a makeshift prosthetic arm. He was determined to see the battle through to the end, not only for himself, but for his men and the cause they were fighting for. The battle raged on for hours, and despite his severe injuries and the hardships, Nelson did not waver in his command. When victory was finally won, the Danish fleet was in retreat, and the threat to Britain had been neutralized. The Battle of Copenhagen was another strategic victory for Nelson, but it was also a milestone in personal sacrifice. He had given a piece of himself for the victory, proving to the world and his own men that no obstacle was too great to stop his determination. His courage was what inspired his crew to fight to the end, and this battle would become one of the greatest examples of sacrifice and heroism in the history of the British Royal Navy. After the fight, Great Britain was celebrating victory, but the image of Nelson, with one arm less but his spirit still unbreakable, was engraved in the memories of the British people. Nelson had become a legend, not only for the greatness of his victories, but for the sacrifice he was willing to make for his homeland. His physical loss was great, but his legacy, as a tireless leader devoted to duty, would become even stronger. Although the commander had lost an arm, he would never lose his courage, his commitment to his country, and his unwavering leadership. The battle was not only a military victory, but a lesson in what it means to make personal sacrifices in the name of duty and loyalty. The year was 1805, and the tide of history was about to change forever. Horatio Nelson, now a revered and feared commander, was about to face his final battle, a confrontation that would go down in history as one of the greatest military feats of all time. The Battle of Trafalgar, scheduled for October 21st, would be the scene of his last great victory, but also the scene of his heroic death. Europe was in a state of turmoil, with the great powers fighting for dominance of the seas. Britain, under the command of the Royal Navy, had been the pillar of resistance against the empire of Napoleon Bonaparte. The French commander, now with even greater ambitions, had formed an alliance with Spain, seeking to defeat the British fleet and secure control of the English Channel. If Napoleon could succeed in destroying the Royal Navy, his plans to invade Britain would become a reality. The battle was about to be fought, and the fate of the nation depended on Nelson and his fleet. Nelson, aware of the magnitude of the situation, assembled an army of men and ships as determined as he was. Commanding 27 British warships, he would face a combined fleet of 33 French and Spanish ships. He was outnumbered, but Nelson knew that victory would come not from sheer numbers alone, but from the bold tactics and courage of his men. He had complete confidence in his crew and was determined to employ a bold strategy that would defy the traditional form of naval warfare. At dawn on October 21st, 1805, the waters of the Atlantic Ocean were choppy, and a cool breeze was blowing, charged with tension. The two armies met southeast of Cape Trafalgar on the coast of Spain. Nelson's fleet was formed in line of battle in two divisions, one under his personal command and the other under the command of his friend and confidant, Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood. Nelson's plan was simple but audacious: to split the enemy fleet in two, attack them simultaneously from opposite angles, and crush their forces. The battle began with the deafening boom of cannons and the roar of waves crashing against the ship's hulls. Explosions rang through the air as smoke and shrapnel filled the battlefield. Nelson, with his characteristic bravery, led the attack with a boldness that made all those under his command feel invincible. Their ships advanced without hesitation, cutting through the sea like sharp blades as their sails filled with wind. The enemy line, without time to react properly, began to crumble under the impact of the British attack. Yet even at the height of victory, Nelson's courage would be priced high. During the battle, while aboard HMS Victory, the flagship, he was hit by a musket shot from one of the enemy ships. The ball pierced his chest, seriously injuring him. The great commander fell, but his determination did not fail him. Nelson, breathing hard and bleeding, still had the strength to drag himself to the deck, where he was taken below deck for medical attention. Even though he was wounded, Nelson remained conscious, awaiting news from his fleet. He knew that victory was within reach, but he also knew that his time was running out. A final communication reached him, and upon learning that his fleet had defeated the Franco-Spanish alliance, the commander felt a certain relief. Britain was saved, and the threat of Napoleon, at least at sea, had been crushed. With a heavy heart but an immortal spirit, Nelson spoke his last words. "Thank you, God. I have done my duty." At 4:30 p.m., Horatio Nelson died on his ship, with his men still fighting bravely against the enemy fleet. The Battle of Trafalgar was an unqualified triumph for the British. The enemy fleet was destroyed, and Napoleon's ambitions to invade Britain were sunk there at sea. However, the victory was bittersweet, for the great commander who had won it did not live to see it celebrated. Nelson became an enduring symbol of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice, and his loss was felt by the entire nation. Trafalgar sealed his legacy as one of the greatest heroes in naval history, a man whose bravery and strategic vision forever changed the course of the Napoleonic Wars. The news of victory reached Britain like a ray of light, but the people knew that one of their greatest heroes had fallen. Horatio Nelson's name would be remembered forever not only for the victory at Trafalgar, but for the immortal example of courage, sacrifice, and leadership that he gave to the world. The Battle of Trafalgar, while recognized worldwide as an unprecedented strategic victory, became much more than just a great military victory. When Horatio Nelson led his fleet to destroy the powerful Franco-Spanish alliance, he did not just defeat his enemies on the battlefield. He lit a flame of courage and inspiration that would burn for generations. This flame, known as the Spirit of Trafalgar, was an immortal symbol of strength, resilience, and duty that shaped not only the history of Britain, but also of humanity. The Spirit of Trafalgar was not just an abstract idea, but something that manifested itself in the actions of every sailor under Nelson's command. Trafalgar's true victory lay not only in the brilliant naval tactics and maneuvers that Nelson utilized, but in the way he inspired his men. Nelson's simple presence aboard HMS Victory, his relentless leadership, and his indomitable courage in the face of danger turned what could have been just a difficult mission into an epic journey of collective courage. To the men aboard the British ships on October 21st, 1805, Nelson was not just a commander. He was a charismatic leader, someone they could trust with their lives. He had a rare ability to touch the souls of his sailors, something that transcended routine orders and reports. His words and actions created a sense of deep camaraderie, uniting men from different backgrounds and making them a single unit. Nelson knew that the key to success lay not just in strategy, but in the unwavering faith his men placed in him. In an era where naval battles were often brutal and impersonal, Nelson brought humanity to the battlefield. He did not hesitate to put himself in the line of fire, sharing the same risks that his sailors faced. During the Battle of Trafalgar, he refused to take a safe position, remaining at the head of his fleet, immersed in the action. He believed that a leader should be with his men, not just command them from afar. This became an example of courage, something that spread to his subordinates and transformed the fleet into an unstoppable machine. The Spirit of Trafalgar became an invisible but powerful force, driving the sailors to do the impossible. When things seemed hopeless, when thick smoke covered the battlefield and cannons roared from both sides, the sailors looked to Nelson, and he gave them strength. His strategic vision and inspiring words motivated them to fight with everything they had. He was not just a commander who won battles. He was a symbol of resilience, and his leadership infused his men with unshakable courage. In the years that followed, the Spirit of Trafalgar would continue to be a constant inspiration to future generations of sailors, soldiers, and leaders around the world. Nelson's example transcended the confines of the sea and spread beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. His courage and strategic vision influenced countless military campaigns and served as a model for leadership in times of crisis. When the British looked back on their victory at Trafalgar, they didn't just see Horatio Nelson's name. They saw a reflection of a collective spirit, a spirit of resilience and fighting against all odds. They saw proof that when led by a true hero, a leader who can inspire and motivate his men to do more than they thought possible, there is no obstacle that cannot be overcome. When news of Horatio Nelson's death spread, a deep mourning gripped Britain. The national hero, the commander who had led the decisive victory at Trafalgar, had now fallen. Yet his death did not mean the end of his importance. On the contrary, Nelson's loss united the nation in an extraordinary way. He was not just a military commander, but a symbol of unwavering courage and duty fulfilled in resistance to the forces of empire. Nelson was not just a historical figure. He had become a living legend, a story that would be told and retold for centuries. His death, far from weakening the nation, only strengthened the bonds of unity and determination that he himself had cultivated. The British people, immersed in grief, found strength in his memory, and the name of Horatio Nelson will never be forgotten. Thank you for following along on this epic journey with us. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories like this one. Until next time, may Nelson's ever-courageous spirit continue to inspire us all.